Hello, Black Healing Matters. This is Danielle here at the Black Healing Matters podcast, where we offer you ideas to hopefully move you one step closer to your healing. And I'd like to wish you a happy Tuesday. And on this beautiful Know Thy History Tuesday, it is also an extremely special Tuesday. Yes, it is Juneteenth. Have you ever heard of Juneteenth before? Hopefully you have. Whether you are Black or not, Juneteenth is a really important part of our country's history. It represents a very important part of our country's history as Americans. And actually, especially for us African Americans, Americans of African descent, it is a particularly important day. And now, me personally, I did not actually know about the origins or the history of Juneteenth until I was actually an adult and had to research it for myself. So, whether or not you know a whole lot about Juneteenth, today we're going to give you a bit of a crash course, okay? So just so you know, Juneteenth is the oldest known celebration commemorating the end of slavery in the United States. So when people say Juneteenth this, Juneteenth that, this is what they're talking about. They're talking about commemorating the end of slavery. Dating back to 1865, it was on June 19th that the Union soldiers, led by Major General Gordon Granger, landed in Galveston, Texas, with news that the war had ended and that the enslaved were now free. Note, now this is a really important point, note that this was 2.5 years after the President Lincoln Emancipation Proclamation, which had become official on January 1st, 1863. So again, 2.5 years after the Emancipation Proclamation, this information actually made it to Galveston, Texas. Now, can you imagine that? If you were a slave working away in Texas, didn't even know for 2.5 years you've been free. Think about all the babies that were born into slavery at that time. During that 2.5 year span, were born free, actually, according to the law. But as we know, that's not always how things play out. So the Emancipation Proclamation had little impact on Texans due to the minimal number of Union troops to enforce the new executive order. However, the surrender of General Lee in April of 1865, and on the arrival of General Granger's regiment, the forces were finally strong enough to enforce and overcome the resistance. Later attempts to explain this 2.5 year delay in the receipt of the important news has yielded several versions that have been handed down through the years. Here we go. Often told is the story of a messenger who was murdered on his way to Texas with the news of freedom. Another is that the news was delayed and deliberately withheld by enslavers to maintain the labor force of the plantations. And still another story is that the Federal troops actually waited for the slave owners to reap the benefits of one last cotton harvest before going to Texas to enforce the Emancipation Proclamation. All of which, or neither of these versions, could be true. Certainly for some, President Lincoln's authority over the rebellious state was in question. For whatever reason, conditions in Texas remained status quo well beyond what was statutory. So, as we can see here, Texas has always been a rebellious state, and obviously they just were not having it, Nobody knows exactly what happened, but you can imagine they, just weren't having it. And it took 2.5 years to actually enforce the abolition of slavery. Reactions to this profound news ranged from pure shock to immediate jubilation, while many slaves that is, lingered to learn of this new employer-to-employee relationship. Many left before these offers were completely off the lips of their former masters, attesting to the varying conditions on the plantation and the realization of freedom. Even with nowhere to go, many left. Wow. And many felt that leaving the plantation would be their first grasp of freedom. North was a logical destination, and for many, it represented true freedom, while the desire to reach family and friends in neighboring states drove some into Louisiana, Arkansas, and Oklahoma. Settling into these new areas as free men and women brought on new realities, and the challenges of establishing a heretofore non-existent status for Black people in America. Wow. Recounting the memories of that great day in June of 1865 and its festivities would serve as a motivation as well as a release from the growing pressure encountered in their new territories. The celebration of June 19th was coined Juneteenth and grew with more participation from descendants. The Juneteenth celebration was a time of reassuring each other, for praying, and for gathering remaining family members. Juneteenth continues to be highly revered in Texas. Decades later, with many former slaves and descendants making an annual pilgrimage back to Galveston on this day. So, I hope that gives you a little bit of a taste of what Juneteenth actually is and what it represents, what it commemorates. Hopefully, you had a chance to celebrate or commemorate Juneteenth in your own way. I personally, here in Korea, I mean, I didn't have any festivities or anything, but I definitely celebrated in my way. And I told as many people as I could about it. So, I think that this is really an important day for us to not forget. I've talked about this several times on this particular segment of this podcast, is that we as Black people absolutely must be the keepers of our history, especially when we can, when we actually have the option to do so. This is not, Juneteenth is often not in the media. It's often not talked about, but that doesn't mean we have to let it die, because Lord knows we as Black people, we create culture. This is culture that we can actually create, and history that we need to perpetuate for ourselves and for generations to come. And on that note, Black Healing Matters family, if you would like to read more about Juneteenth, you can go to the website where I got this information from, juneteenth.com. It's a great website, and it has lots of resources. And you can get that in the show notes. It will be linked. Stay blessed. Happy Juneteenth. And as always, Black Healing Matters.
The podcast you just heard was published with Anchor. Got something you want to say to the creator of this show? Send them a voice message using the Anchor app, free for iOS and Android.